welcome to the Tracy Sandler Show, brought to you by Vivo. I am your host, Tracy Sandler, and I am very excited to be joined today by staff writer and reporter Bree Dix of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 49ers will be playing them on Sunday. Bree, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. We have a big game for both teams on Sunday.
Yes.
We were talking before, and I said kind of a big game. No, not kind of. It's a big game. This is an important one. 49ers coming off their bye and a win over the Dallas Cowboys, but sit at 4-4. The Bucs coming off a tough Monday night loss to the Chiefs.
Yes.
Kind of give me an idea of what the vibe has been like over at the Bucs facility this week, coming off that game. Obviously positives to take away from it, but always tough to go into overtime in that kind of game and not come out victorious.
I think the biggest thing for this team right now is just you're getting a sense of the urgency. We've lost 3 straight, and even though it was a really close game against the Chiefs, went into overtime, gave them the biggest fit of anybody, almost snapped their undefeated record, but at the end of the day, you didn't come out with a win. And so it's like a month from now, no one cares, no one knows. It's wins and losses is what makes it in the NFL. So I think just wanting to get that momentum back, wanting to gain the confidence heading into the bye week. And that kind of comes at the perfect time for us with just all of the injuries that we've sustained, decimated at wide receiver. One of our corners has been out, obviously Mike Evans with a hamstring injury. So I think you're just wanting to go into the bye week with some momentum and to get that win to build some of that back up against an amazing 49ers team that has so many different weapons to kind of get everything back in the right direction of where the Bucs are wanting the rest of the season to go.
It's interesting. Last season and sometimes this season, the 49ers, in terms of rest differential, have been on the, I guess, losing end of it. I don't really know the better way to say it. This will be the first week, I think, all season where they're going to be on the winning end of rest differential, where they're coming off the bye. They got a team that played Monday night into overtime, ready to get into their bye. You mentioned a great 49ers team with a lot of weapons, but the issue this 49ers team has had throughout the season is an inability to finish games. And inability, as Fred Warner and George Kittle would call it, to finish out the grimy games, those grungy games. And that's kind of been their identity, that they've been able to do that. And this certainly is not the first time they've had their backs against the wall. The Cardinals are right now ahead in the division, and then it's the Seahawks and the 49ers. And right now the Niners would have the head-to-head tie. A lot of football left to play. But you mentioned these weapons, and the weapons have to fully come together. So let's start with what you said about the decimated wide receiver crew of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up a 49ers defense that has struggled at times. Who is Baker Mayfield relying on there in the pass game?
Well, and I can't say enough about, first off, just what the offensive staff has been able to do to kind of supplement the production of Chris Godwin, of Mike Evans, because obviously it isn't realistic to do that with one specific player. So it's kind of been a collective approach, but the person that really has stepped up is tight end Cade Otton. He has played out of his mind, is second among tight ends right now in nearly every statistical category. And he's kind of become that go-to target for Baker Mayfield on third down, because the Bucs offense was really predicated on Mike Evans as that deep threat, and then Chris Godwin, and kind of building those yak yards off the underneath area out of the slot. But Cade Otton, you're seeing him, and again, I think it's kind of an ability that he's had all along. We just haven't really gotten to see it because you have Mike Evans, you have Chris Godwin, but you're really seeing his growth as a route runner, because he's essentially running routes now that were routes that Chris Godwin would run and are very difficult for a tight end. It's the choice routes underneath. He had a touchdown against the Chiefs on a wheel route. It's the outbreakers. It's all of these things that he isn't traditionally doing, but he's doing it at a high level and has kind of shown the ability, because he plays every down. And really, other than, George Kittle, I mean, there's not many tight ends in the NFL right now that are really well-rounded and are just as good as a blocker as they are as a receiving threat. But Cade has really shown the ability to not only, get separation from man, but also just kind of finding those soft spots in zones. So it's been exciting to see what he's been able to do. And then Jalen McMillan also missed the game against the Chiefs with a hamstring injury. So you were seeing Sterling Shepard, who had the camaraderie with Baker Mayfield from Oklahoma. You're seeing him kind of step up doing some of the jet sweep stuff. And then you have Ryan Miller, who was on the practice squad last year, made a transition from tight end to wide receiver in college at Furman. And then he scores. I mean, I didn't have it on my bingo card for sure for that game, but I mean, the last drive that tied it at 24 to get us into overtime. Ryan Miller, which again was kind of a traditional route that a tight end would run. And then it's just Ryan Miller in the corner of the end zone. So again, just Baker Mayfield, just finding guys and just their ability to be able to sustain drives, to move the chains, in the running game with, Bucky Irving, Rashad White, using those guys in the pass game to kind of create, essentially not diverting too much from what they want to do and the way that the game plan is set up, but just kind of finding guys to take on those roles of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
It's interesting. Sounds a little bit like the 49ers who, starting with the run game, predicating on that, using their tight ends as receivers, which of course brings up the age old question, is the tight end a receiver? I would say in both of these offenses right now, yes, the tight end is definitely a receiver. 49ers, of course, without Brandon Ayuk for the rest of the season. They have been without Juwan Jennings. He should be back this week. That's Brock Purdy's third down guy. George Kittle is certainly somebody that he trusts and goes to a lot. But third and Juwan, he's got his own little nickname for it. So he's really his third down guy. But then there's another guy coming back this week that's big for the 49ers. But before we get to that, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about Baker Mayfield. It's obviously Christian McCaffrey. I mean, everybody knows that, but we'll get to Christian a little bit.
Of course, he comes back for this one.
Yes, he should be coming back this week if all goes according to plan.
Right.
But I want to talk a little about Baker Mayfield because we saw him last season and even more so this season playing career football. Came in. It's really hard to be a number one pick quarterback in the NFL, and we've seen it. Over time, we're seeing this resurgence of Jared Goff the last several years, and Baker's playing such good football. He's at, I think, a team that's good for him, a system that's good for him. Kind of, how have you seen him evolve since he's got there, and what is the confidence level like at this point?
I think he's a guy that just energizes the entire team. He's that enforcer. He has kind of that patented moxie, but he's just a guy that people want to play for, and he's rallied this team. And I think you're just seeing what he's able to do with stability, because he hadn't really ever had that in his career, and had a staff that is completely behind him and says, okay, just go out, do you play football. If you make a mistake, we're not going to bench you. Just having that awareness and that belief that this coaching staff has put in him. And then now, has, his first child now has settled down in Tampa. And I think you're just seeing him completely take the reins of this offense and of this team. And that has kind of sparked his play on the field as well. And you're seeing him play, the best football. And I think you're just seeing whether it's, his scrambles to get a first down, some of the tight window throws that he's made. But just all the way around, he's playing the best football of his career. But also, if you would have said, the Bucs lose Mike Evans, they lose Chris Godwin, those are the guys that he relies on. But to see him just be able to find that with other guys or people that he necessarily hasn't had the timing down with. And you've seen that a little bit, whether, the miscommunication where he thinks a receiver is going to keep going and they stop and they don't get to right depth or whatever. And that's going to happen. But to still be able to have guys and to force everybody around him to step up and to lead in the correct way, you're seeing the fruition of that now.
So I mentioned Christian McCaffrey. The 49ers have been without him really since early in training camp. It was a calf injury, that was Achilles, and he had Achilles tendonitis in both legs. And they've been ramping him up the last several weeks, just for anybody who hasn't been following this quite as closely as I've had to. He's been ramping this up over the last several weeks, and they opened his practice window Monday. He came out of Monday's practice well. We're recording this Thursday, so of course he was limited in Wednesday's practice. Don't know new information, but assuming everything goes as planned, he should be back on Sunday. So lucky Bucs, they get the debut of Christian McCaffrey in 2024. But what we don't, what we don't know, and this will be, kind of interesting to see, is what is the workload going to be like? How careful do they have to be about that? And how has this injury affected? I mean, Christians. I think about, so I'm a huge Dodger fan, and you may or may not know the Dodgers won the World Series, and I am a diehard Dodger fan, and Shohei Ohtani, tears his labrum in game 2. And he continues to play. He's not as effective, but his presence makes such a difference. And I say this because Dave Roberts says a small percentage of Shohei Ohtani is still probably better than most everybody else. So I would relate that to Christian McCaffrey, and that even if he's not like 110% Christian McCaffrey, he's still Christian McCaffrey, and he's a danger in the passing game. He's a danger in the running game. We've seen him throw a touchdown. Like, there's so much that he can do. So how do the Bucs prepare to deal with him while also dealing with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and now Ricky Pearsall and the person who I feel like is underrated and people forget about, Kyle Juszczyk. There's so many parts of this offense, and now you adding Christian back in. How does the Bucs defense prepare for that?
Well, I think one of the biggest things for the Bucs defense and going against a team like the 49ers that is so physical, but also that is just kind of predicated on exploiting space, right? Whether it's George Kittle, whether it's Christian McCaffrey, whether it's Deebo, like all of those weapons. And if you account for one, well, then that potentially opens up opportunities for somebody else. But I think it's going to be all hats to the ball, and also just being disciplined with their eyes, whether it's with the motions, any of those things that defenses can kind of get, the eye candy, setting the edge, doing all of it. Because if you don't, then you're gonna get exploited. And that's kind of been the thing that's the Bucs have struggled with, especially in zone. I feel like whether it was Travis Kelce kind of exploiting the middle of the field on some of those underneath when we played the Chiefs. And the Bucs have not done well against tight ends this year. We're like 31st in the NFL with yards we're giving up to. Only the Chiefs have given up more. So I think especially George Kittle is somebody that the Bucs are really going to need to key in on, because not only is he one of the best blocking tight ends in NFL history, but I mean, he's a guy that can beat his safety on a deep over. So, and down obviously one of our corners, but just being discipline, being in the right place, reading your keys, because some of the biggest errors have been miscommunication and also just blown coverages. And if you have one guy that isn't executing right, or he blows his gap, or he goes, then you can get exposed. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing going up against a team that has so many positionless players, essentially.
That's a very good way to put it. I think the 49ers perhaps lead the league in positionless players, people who can just do so many different things. I mean, even on the other side of the ball, it's not quite the same, but they have Deommodore Lenoir, who is equally as effective inside as he is outside at the corner position. Rookie Renardo Green seems to be following in his footsteps that way. So I would say that's a very good way to put it. A lot of positionless players.
Yes.
So
an embarrassment of riches, if you will.
Embarrassment of riches. And even with the injuries, and this team, one of the biggest strengths the 49ers have going into this game is they're getting so many guys back. I mean, this team has had so many injuries to start the season. In 2023, they have the best injury luck. In 2024, not so much. And I obviously mentioned Brandon Ayuk. I mentioned Christian McCaffrey being out, but then on the other side of the ball, they lost Javon Hargrave for the season. Kevin Givens did not practice on Wednesday with a groin injury. They did get some depth with Khalil Davis, which is going to be a little confusing in the beginning because the 49ers have a defensive tackle named Kalia Davis, and then they traded for Khalil Davis. So just as an FYI, keeping your eye out on Sunday for all the K Davises. But they got a little bit of depth there. But they're going to be very reliant on Nick Bosa. And I know he and Baker Mayfield have some history, and Nick says now there's nothing but love and no animosity, but they're competitors, and it'll be, competitors against each other. But you're very reliant on Nick Bosa, on Fred Warner, on that secondary. But that defensive line of the 49ers has just not been what we've seen in the past. They haven't been as strong. They haven't been quite as quick. And I think this is such an important game for them as people are coming back healthy, to establish themselves and to kind of get themselves back to, as cheesy as this sounds, in that 49ers football. Because this team has always been predicated on the line and the run game. I mean, that's their strengths. That's what they build around. And so the line will have its work cut out for them. But, it's going to be an important game and could be a tough game. And one place they certainly have struggled is against the run. And we did touch on it earlier, but could you go into maybe a little bit more specifics about the Bucs run game and kind of the challenges that it will bring up for San Francisco?
Yeah. Well, it's been exciting to see because, again, this team has finished last in rushing the last 2 years. And that's one of the things that they've constantly been wanting to focus on, but just haven't really been able to have that success. But this year, especially bringing in Bucky Irving, I think he's just elevated the entire room. He's so slippery. He's not the biggest back, but he runs with great contact balance, has incredible vision, a missed tackle machine. And he's kind of just doing the same thing that he did at Oregon with the Bucs. But I think one of the biggest things is the ability to, and kind of his downhill charge is a perfect fit for kind of the counter gap runs, is kind of a lot of what the Bucs have been able to have success with, where you have guys pulling. And the Bucs have a really athletic offensive line, but he just has the vision and the cutback and the ability to make people miss. So that has really, really elevated the Bucs ground game. And then Rachaad White obviously is really great on the perimeter. And whether it's off screens, whether it's off like outside zone, that's kind of what his bread and butter is. But I think kind of all together, they complement one another. And then kind of if they need to keep legs fresh, bringing in Sean Tucker, we've seen what he's been able to do in certain games when Rachaad White's been out for injury. So that has definitely been a bright spot and something that the Bucs have relied on. And even on, first or second down, being able to get those positive yards that necessarily maybe in the past have been like 1-2 yard gains. And now you're getting 4, you're getting 5, you're getting 6. So this is definitely the best run game that I have seen since I started covering the Bucs. And a lot of that I think is Bucky Irving and his implementation into the run game.
Well, and that will be a challenge. The 49ers are still without Dre Greenlaw, which I have made the argument for weeks that no Dre Greenlaw on defense to me is very similar to the no Christian McCaffrey on offense. I mean, he's such an important part of that defense and the way he plays and how physical he plays. So that this will definitely be a challenge for San Francisco. We mentioned Christian's workload. Obviously, Jordan Mason has done a great job in Christian's absence. Isaac Guerrendo, another rookie, has really come alive. The 49ers rookie class actually has been tremendous, and honestly don't know where this team would be without them, because it's just interesting that these are all these guys that were drafted and were kind of not fighting for spots, but fighting for roles, because it was a team that was basically set and maybe, building for the future, getting some depth. And a lot of them have been thrown into very important roles, and they've done a really good job. So we'll see more of that on Sunday, and we'll see how the 49ers navigate it as some of their guys come back, but then they still get, some of the rookies in there. So it should be it really should be a good game. Do you have a prediction for me, just on, we don't have to do points or anything like that, but how you think the game will go for the Bucs?
Ooh, I was I honestly think this is going to be a really good game for the Bucs. I think just the urgency, the mentality that the team has had this week. And I think it's disappointing as it was to watch. I mean, I can't imagine being that close. And I mean, you just saw it whenever we lost the coin toss and Baker just does his head back. So many things for him to will it down, get that drive to tie it up. And they've been in, as you said, with the 49ers, we've been so close so many times, but just finishing them out, putting the exclamation mark on the victory. And I think the Bucs are ready for a win and ready to get that bad taste out of their mouth of a lot of these games that have been right there. And we had the ability to win the game, but just miscues here and there. So I want to see this as being a game where the Bucs are able to put it all together.
And with the 49ers, the one thing we haven't talked about, and the X factor, it's very obvious X factor because it's the quarterback, but this is a big Brock Purdy game. And we've seen Brock play well this season, maybe not as well as we've seen in the past. And I think him coming out of the bye kind of back to where he's been. You mentioned slippery. He's very slippery. He is able to scramble for yards, but you don't want him to rely on that. And you would hope that over these couple weeks, even though obviously they were gone for the bye, but his time has gone on, and that this week in practice, he's getting more chemistry with Ricky Pearsall, more chemistry with Jacob Cowing, the return of Jawan Jennings. I mean, Deebo Samuel is dealing with rib and oblique, and he practiced with the blue jersey on Wednesday. I imagine he will play, but it's going to be an important game for Brock Purdy to be on his game and to really read the field and be accurate and not deal with some of the little struggles that he has had thus far this season. And so for the 49ers, and I know it sounds obvious, but we talk about all the different things they have. I think Brock Purdy in this particular game would be the difference I believe, between winning and losing. And yes, he's the quarterback, but that's not always the case. Sometimes, like the defense can really make plays, and that's true. But I just think this is going to be a really important game for Brock Purdy, especially coming out of the bye and setting the tone for the rest of the season, because the 49ers have a tough month ahead of them. They go to Tampa this weekend, home against the Seahawks, then go to Green Bay, and then go to Buffalo. This is not an easy month that they have in front of them. And it's a lot of travel. And I actually asked Kyle Shanahan about that on Wednesday, and he said, you like to be home, but sometimes that kind of travel is good for the team because they're very together and can hunker down. But this will be the first of it. And again, coming off the bye. So that will be interesting. But before I let you go, for fans going to Tampa and perhaps maybe reporters spending the weekend in Tampa, do you have any great restaurants, bars, coffee places that you can recommend for us?
I'm a massive foodie. So, oh man. So I would say my go-tos. So Armature Works is kind of one of
Armature?
Yes, Armature Works is kind of a big spot in Tampa. It's essentially almost like a restaurant food court that's outside. Really great restaurants, but there's a place there called Ulele that has, I don't know if you're a seafood person, but they have incredible seafood. Their seafood risotto is out of this world. That's one of my favorites. And then I love Italian food. It is like my absolute heart. So Olivia has phenomenal Italian food. From like the arancini to like the bolognese rigatoni, it's fabulous. So I would say those are two of my favorite spots in Tampa. And then if you're wanting just like a prototypical Florida vibe, the palm tree swing, the live music, outdoor, Salt Shack on the Bay is a great place. They have incredible pina coladas, great lobster bisque.
Amazing. And coffee, any great coffee places? I'm a coffee person.
I am too. I am an addict. No question. Unfortunately, coffee is one of those things that I have not found my good coffee shop yet here, and it's very depressing. So honestly, if you find a great one, the only place I can think of is, so in Davis Island, there's a place called Davis Island Coffee Co. And they have really good coffee. They have good pastries. It's not a huge place. Like there's not a ton of indoor seating. But that's probably some of the best I've had. But it's not necessarily as close to me anymore. But that's one of the things that I need to find a good coffee spot.
Okay. Well, if I find one, I will make sure to share.
Please do.
Appreciate you joining me today. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yes, I am on Twitter at Brianna Dix NFL, and then on Instagram at Brianna M Dix. So, and then also all of my articles are on Buccaneers.com.
Fantastic. You guys know I'm on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it, at Tracy FGSN, Instagram and TikTok at Tracy Sandler. We are brought to you by FIVO. We are brought to you by Bet Online. Please give us a 5-star rating and a very positive review because we very much appreciate it. And with that, I'll talk to everybody next time. Bye, all.